In the sterile silence of a luxury clinic's presidential suite, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors was the only sign of life. Christopher Miller, 45, lay motionless, his skin pale under the dim light, a thin scar trailing across his temple, the only visible remnant of the private jet crash that had nearly claimed his life. The world believed the black tech billionaire was in a deep coma, fighting for his life. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Christopher had regained consciousness 3 days after the crash. Instead of revealing his condition, he made a bold decision. He would stay silent, pretending to be unconscious while he quietly searched for answers. He suspected that the crash wasn't an accident, but a targeted act of sabotage, and to uncover the truth, he needed to hear what people would say when they thought he couldn't listen. From behind the glass walls of his private room, hushed conversations began to betray hidden agendas. His wife of 8 years, Vanessa, and his half-brother Logan, also the COO of Miller Dynamics, stood side by side, voices low but clear. Vanessa's words were calculating. If the board doesn't act soon, investors will lose confidence. We need to push the incapacitation clause. Logan, with a calm that masked ambition, replied, "Dr. Blake's report will seal it. 1 more week and the company is ours." Christopher's heart pounded beneath the stillness, his worst fears confirmed. Not only had someone tried to kill him, but the very people he had trusted most were now orchestrating a corporate coup while he lay in a fabricated coma. His mind raced with rage and clarity. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about justice. But just as the darkness around him began to close in, hope arrived in the most unexpected form. A new night nurse entered his life, Jasmine Torres, a quiet woman with keen eyes and a calm, unwavering presence. Unlike the others, Jasmine didn't speak to him like a lost cause. She addressed him with clarity, professionalism, and even respect. But what struck Christopher most wasn't her voice, it was her instincts. That night she sat beside him in silence, and then, almost as if confessing to a sleeping god, she whispered, "I shouldn't be here. Something about your records isn't right." Her words sent a jolt through Christopher's chest. She explained that she wasn't just a nurse. She had a background in forensic neurology and had been brought in under suspicious circumstances after the sudden resignation of the previous nurse. Jasmine had reviewed his medical files and noticed inconsistencies. Sedation levels were dangerously high. Reflex reports had been falsified and progress notes appeared fabricated. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone wants to keep you like this, and I don't think it's for your health." In that moment, Christopher knew he wasn't alone. Someone saw the truth, and she was willing to risk everything to uncover it. Even though he couldn't speak or move freely, he wanted to scream out to thank her, to warn her. But he stayed still, his breath calm, trusting that this unexpected ally had just altered the course of everything. Jasmine didn't stop there. Over the next few nights, she began subtly reducing his sedation levels, hiding the adjustments from the clinic's monitoring systems. Her hands moved with precision, but her eyes carried a mix of fear and determination. Each evening, she would sit by his bed and speak quietly, telling him about her growing suspicions, the strange behavior of the doctors, and her decision to seek external help. Christopher, still playing the part of a lifeless body, began to respond in the smallest ways, a twitch of a finger, a blink, a subtle breath change. Slowly a silent language formed between them, each signal a beacon of mutual trust. Together in the shadows of betrayal, they built a fragile alliance. In a world where silence was a shield and stillness a disguise, Christopher Miller had found a way to fight back, not with power or voice, but with patient strategy and the help of a stranger brave enough to see past the lies. What began as a coma became a crucible for resilience. And while the world waited for the fate of a billionaire, the man behind the closed eyes was listening, planning and preparing for the storm he would unleash. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. And Jasmine's courage had just lit the first spark late one night under the veil of quiet footsteps and dimmed lights. Jasmine leaned in close to Christopher's ear, whispering words she had been holding back since her first shift. "I'm not just a night nurse," she said softly. her eyes darting to the door. "I specialize in forensic neurology, and I believe someone is deliberately keeping you sedated." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of truth. She described the abnormalities she'd found in his medication records, the unexplainable dosages, and the falsified reflex tests. It wasn't just malpractice, it was intentional suppression. "Someone doesn't want you to wake up," she whispered. Christopher, still lying motionless, felt his pulse surge. For the first time since the crash, he wasn't alone in knowing the truth. That same night, Jasmine brought a small notepad and placed it near his fingers. "If you can hear me," she said gently, "move your index finger once for yes, twice for no." The silence lingered like a storm about to break. Then ever so slightly his finger moved once. Jasmine froze her breath, catching in her throat. "You're conscious," she murmured, overwhelmed. From that moment their silent pact began. Over the next few nights, Jasmine developed a basic communication system. Simple blinks, tiny twitches, and eventually a slow spelling method using alphabet cards. It was painstaking and exhausting, but every letter Christopher spelled felt like a battle won. One of the first things he spelled was chilling. "They sabotaged my plane." Jasmine's hand trembled as she asked who. The answer: Vanessa, Logan, SolarEdge. The revelation hit her like a lightning bolt. Jasmine had heard whispers of the SolarEdge Initiative, a groundbreaking renewable energy program that Christopher had quietly developed to provide low-cost energy to underserved communities. It was visionary, disruptive, and sure to threaten powerful interests in the traditional energy sector. If Vanessa and Logan had orchestrated the crash, it wasn't just about power. It was about silencing a revolution before it could begin. Jasmine understood the stakes. Now, this wasn't just corporate betrayal. It was an assault on an idea that could change millions of lives. She leaned in closer. "We'll find a way," she promised, "but we need help." The next evening, Jasmine made a discreet phone call to an old mentor, Dr. Elaine Harper, a renowned expert in forensic medicine who had exposed hospital corruption cases. In the past, trusting Jasmine's instincts, Dr. Harper agreed to visit the clinic under the guise of a consultant. When she arrived, her demeanor was professional, composed, but her eyes scanned everything. Jasmine secured a window of privacy, and behind locked doors and drawn curtains, Dr. Harper conducted a covert neurological exam on Christopher. After 30 minutes of non-invasive testing, she looked at Jasmine and gave a grim nod. "There's no neurological damage," she confirmed. "He should have awakened days ago. The only thing keeping him in this state is criminal over-sedation." Now, with medical validation and a trusted ally, the quiet resistance began to take form. Jasmine, Christopher, and Dr. Harper mapped out their plan: gather irrefutable evidence, protect the integrity of SolarEdge, and most importantly, reveal the betrayal before the board voted to remove Christopher permanently. Jasmine kept careful logs of every irregular dosage, every visit from Logan or Vanessa, and every suspicious behavior by Dr. Blake. At night, she continued decoding Christopher's messages, spelling out the names of those he suspected were involved, and confirming the critical files they needed to retrieve. Each word spoken in whispers, each plan drawn behind locked doors, was one more piece of armor in their war for truth. During the day, Jasmine wore the mask of professionalism, nodding to supervisors and carrying out her duties with meticulous care. But in the shadows, she became something far greater than a nurse. She was Christopher's lifeline. She planted hidden audio recorders, secured backups of tampered files, and even managed to obtain footage of Logan discussing medical falsification with Dr. Blake. The deeper they dug, the more the corruption unraveled. It wasn't just a family betrayal, it was a conspiracy involving bribery, fraud, and a well-planned strategy to derail SolarEdge before its launch. And at the center of it all stood Christopher, silenced, restrained, but far from broken. As their alliance solidified, a new kind of hope bloomed in the room, where Christopher once felt completely alone. Jasmine's bravery had sparked a movement, and Dr. Harper's expertise gave it weight. Christopher, though still bound to the bed, now had a voice, one that spoke through fingertips, courage, and a shared belief that justice could prevail. They knew the clock was ticking. The board meeting was approaching. The coup was accelerating, but in the heart of a silent man and the hands of a fearless woman, a revolution had begun quietly, deliberately, and with purpose. And when the time came, they would be ready to speak, not just for Christopher, but for the future SolarEdge was meant to serve. The tension inside the Miller Dynamics executive boardroom was so thick it seemed to press against the glass walls. 12 impeccably dressed board members sat in a semicircle, their expressions solemn, as Logan Miller stood confidently at the head of the table. In his hand, he held a stack of medical documents, each one bearing the signature of Dr. Blake, and each one reinforcing the same chilling conclusion: Christopher Miller, the company's visionary founder and CEO, had suffered irreversible brain damage. Logan's voice was steady, almost soothing as he presented his case. With deep regret, he said, "We must act in the best interest of the company. The stock has declined by double digits. Our competitors are circling Christopher's condition, leaves us no choice but to transfer executive authority." Beside Logan sat Vanessa, dressed in elegant black, her expression carefully curated to suggest grief. She nodded solemnly as Logan spoke occasionally, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, though no tears ever truly came. On the other side of the room, Elizabeth Dorsey, the only black board member and Christopher's longtime friend, watched silently. Something didn't sit right with her. The timing was too convenient, the tone too rehearsed, as Logan handed out final copies of the neurologist's report and motioned toward a vote. The air shifted. Elizabeth raised a hand. "Why isn't Dr. Blake here to explain his findings in person?" She asked. Logan hesitated for a moment too long. "Emergency call," he replied quickly, but his report speaks for itself. And just as he reached for the gavel to initiate the vote, a deep, familiar voice echoed from the entrance. "I believe I can speak for myself." Every head in the room turned. Standing at the doorway, upright and commanding, was Christopher Miller, dressed in a navy suit, a cane in his left hand, and eyes blazing with clarity. He walked slowly but deliberately into the room. At his side were Jasmine Torres and Dr. Elaine Harper, both composed, calm and resolute. Just behind them, Rachel Monroe. Christopher's long-trusted legal counsel held a black leather briefcase close to her chest. For a moment, the room was frozen. Logan's face turned a shade paler. Vanessa's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. The man they believed to be vegetative, possibly dying, now stood before them as living proof of their deceit. Without waiting for an invitation, Christopher made his way to the table and rested his cane against the chair once occupied by Logan. Rachel opened the briefcase and began distributing neatly bound packets to each board member. "Before you vote," Christopher said, "you deserve to see the truth." The packets contained transcripts, time-stamped logs, and medical reports independently verified by Dr. Harper. Jasmine placed a tablet in front of the group and played a video hidden camera footage from the clinic hallway. On screen, Logan could be heard telling Dr. Blake, "Keep him sedated until after the board vote, then we'll let nature take its course." Murmurs erupted around the room as the weight of the words sank in. The video continued, capturing Vanessa, referring to the SolarEdge project as an obstacle that needs to be eliminated. But that was only the beginning. Rachel presented a second set of documents: wire transfers from an offshore account controlled by Logan, funneling money to Dr. Blake's private consultancy 3 days before the crash. Then came emails between Vanessa and Logan, detailing plans to declare Christopher incapacitated and fast-track a shareholder vote. "This is a coordinated effort," Rachel said firmly, "a calculated criminal conspiracy to commit fraud, corporate theft, and attempted murder." Dr. Harper stepped forward with her own findings, outlining how Christopher's sedation had no medical justification and how records were altered to mask his true condition. The room, once filled with skepticism, now rippled with anger and disbelief. Logan tried to recover his composure. "This is all a setup," he snapped. "That footage is doctored. You can't believe this nurse, forensic neurology expert." Jasmine interrupted calmly. Certified in digital evidence analysis. Vanessa, visibly shaken, attempted to spin the narrative. Christopher, darling, you're confused. This has been traumatic for all of us. But her words rang hollow. Christopher's eyes never left hers. You sold your wedding ring a week after the crash, he said coldly. You had the house appraiser over before I was even off life support. Security guards had entered quietly and stood near the back of the room. Rachel turned to them. Mr. Logan Miller and Mrs. Vanessa Miller are to be escorted to the lobby. Officers are waiting. As Logan and Vanessa were led out, faces pale and silent, the board sat in stunned silence. Christopher took a deep breath and turned back to his team. This company was built on innovation, not corruption, on integrity, not betrayal. He looked at Elizabeth, then Jasmine, then Rachel. We may have been blindsided, but we are not broken, and I will not allow Miller Dynamics to fall into the hands of those who see power as their birthright rather than a responsibility. The boardroom, once tainted by deception, now bore witness to a reclaiming of truth. Christopher had walked back into his empire not as a victim, but as a man reborn, armed with justice and flanked by allies who never stopped believing in the power of what was right. The fallout from the boardroom showdown was swift and devastating. Within hours of Christopher Miller's return and the unveiling of the conspiracy, law enforcement officers arrived at the Miller Dynamics headquarters. Logan Miller and Vanessa Miller were both escorted out of the building in handcuffs, their faces pale and eyes hollow with disbelief. The charges were severe attempted murder conspiracy to commit corporate fraud and obstruction of justice. News of the arrests spread like wildfire across media outlets, shaking the business world and igniting a firestorm of scrutiny on corporate ethics. At the same time, Dr. Blake, the once respected medical director of the private clinic, was stripped of his medical license and placed under investigation. His participation in the deliberate oversedation and falsification of medical records would soon land him before a criminal court, facing charges of gross medical negligence and criminal collusion. Amid the chaos, Christopher took decisive steps to rebuild not only the reputation of Miller Dynamics, but also its soul. One of his first official acts was the appointment of Rachel Monroe as the company's new chief legal officer. Her loyalty, brilliance, and relentless pursuit of truth during the darkest days made her the obvious choice. Under her leadership, the company began an internal audit, not to protect itself, but to uncover any hidden rot that had taken hold during the days when greed outpaced integrity. But Christopher didn't stop there with guidance from Dr. Elaine Harper and the unwavering support of Jasmine Torres. He launched the Miller Harper Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to reforming ethical practices in healthcare systems nationwide. Funded directly through a portion of the SolarEdge Initiative's profits, the foundation would serve as both watchdog and advocate, pushing for transparency, safety protocols, and patient protections in private and public medical institutions alike. The SolarEdge Initiative, once seen as a financial risk by conservative board members, now stood at the center of Christopher's redemption arc. What began as a socially conscious energy project quietly took on symbolic meaning. To the world, it represented what corporate power could achieve when channeled for good. As the first round of solar microgrids rolled out across low-income neighborhoods, reducing utility costs by up to 70%, investors took notice. Stocks surged not in spite of the company's values, but because of them. Business leaders and analysts across the country began pointing to Miller Dynamics as proof that purpose and profit could coexist. And Christopher, once a symbol of elite success, became a national figure of principled leadership, one who had turned betrayal into blueprint. Within the walls of the company, everything began to change. Christopher initiated new hiring practices focused on diversity and inclusion mentorship programs for young engineers from underserved backgrounds and ethics training that went beyond compliance to focus on character. He opened the doors of the boardroom to community voices and created a council within the company that included employees from every level, janitors, programmers, technicians, so that decision-making wasn't confined to corner offices. His vision wasn't just to rebuild the company's image, it was to redefine its purpose. And those who had once worked under fear or silence began speaking openly, contributing ideas, and taking pride in the company they served. For the first time in years, Miller Dynamics felt alive again. Outside the company's glass towers, the Miller Harper Foundation wasted no time. Working with hospitals, lawmakers, and advocacy groups, they began pushing for sweeping reforms, mandatory oversight committees in private clinics, patient surveillance safeguards, and penalties for falsified medical documentation. Jasmine, who had once quietly monitored monitors in the night, now stood on stages at healthcare symposiums, sharing her story and calling for systemic change. Dr. Harper, once a shadowy ally, became a leading voice in the movement, and Christopher ensured their message was backed not just by sentiment, but by funding, legal support, and political will. Through it all, Christopher remained grounded, not by revenge, but by purpose. He knew the fight wasn't over. He understood that power, when unchecked, could still find new ways to exploit, but he also believed deeply that justice, when earned and protected, could inspire a different kind of legacy. Miller Dynamics would never be the same, and that was the point. The attempted takeover had not broken the company, it had awakened it. From the ashes of betrayal, Christopher had forged something stronger. An empire with a conscience, a business with a backbone, and a mission that reached beyond boardrooms into the very heart of humanity. 6 months had passed since the day Christopher Miller walked back into the boardroom and reclaimed his company, his name, and his legacy. In that short span of time, a quiet revolution had taken root across the country. The SolarEdge Initiative, once a guarded secret, was now transforming entire communities. Block by block, rooftop by rooftop, neighborhoods that had long been neglected were now glowing with clean, affordable solar energy. Utility bills dropped by nearly 70% in the first rollout areas. Local schools extended evening hours thanks to reliable lighting. Small businesses reopened with lower overhead costs. And for the first time in decades, families in these communities felt the tangible benefits of innovation, designed not to exploit, but to empower investors, once wary of the project's humanitarian vision, now flocked to it. The company's reputation soared. Miller Dynamics had not only recovered, it had been reborn. Inside the company's new headquarters, Christopher stood by the panoramic glass window of his redesigned office, watching children play in a nearby public park that now bore the SolarEdge emblem. Behind him, the walls were no longer lined with stock charts and trophies, but with framed photos of real families benefiting from the energy initiative. As he turned, he saw Jasmine Torres enter with a digital tablet in hand, her energy as unwavering as ever. Fully recovered, Christopher moved with strength, but it was his presence, calm, composed, and centered, that had truly transformed. He greeted Jasmine with a grateful smile. "You saved my life," he told her softly. "But more than that, you helped me find a reason to fight beyond power. I used to think leadership meant control. Now I know it means care, vision, and responsibility." Their footsteps echoed through the company's new innovation hub, a sleek, collaborative space filled with young engineers, designers, and researchers from diverse backgrounds. Some were coding energy-efficient systems, others sketching designs for solar-powered water filtration units. Christopher walked, slowly observing not just the technology, but the spirit behind it. "This," he said, glancing around, "is what Miller Dynamics was always meant to be. A home for bold ideas led by bold people who care." Jasmine paused beside a 3D model of their next project, a modular solar grid designed for deployment in refugee camps. "We're not just fixing old systems anymore," she said. "We're building entirely new ones." Christopher nodded. "Exactly. And this time we're doing it with our eyes open and our hearts aligned." As they moved through the space team, members greeted Jasmine not just as the nurse who had saved the CEO, but as a partner in vision. She had become more than a symbol of bravery. She was now Director of Ethics and Innovation, a role created by Christopher to ensure that compassion would forever be part of the company's blueprint. Together, the two of them reviewed maps marking expansion into Latin America, sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Southeast Asia. Each pin on the map represented a promise, not just to deliver energy, but to deliver dignity, access, and opportunity. We used to measure success in market share, Christopher said. Now we measure it in lives changed. It was more than a mission, it was a philosophy. One forged in betrayal, but matured in purpose. Meanwhile, the Miller-Harper Foundation continued to grow its reach, reforming hospital oversight protocols and advocating for patient safety. Jasmine often traveled to conferences, speaking alongside Dr. Harper about how one ethical stand in a quiet hospital room had sparked a systemic shift. She never mentioned the danger never sought praise. Instead, she focused on the message that silence in the face of injustice is complicity, and that ordinary people can create extraordinary change if they act with courage. Back home, Christopher supported these efforts, ensuring that 30% of SolarEdge profits were reinvested into education, medical safeguards, and ethical reform. The media dubbed it the Miller model, a blueprint for socially driven capitalism. But to those inside the company, it was simply the right thing to do. One late afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled into the lobby, Christopher and Jasmine paused before a glass-etched plaque recently installed on the wall. It read, "True strength isn't how much power you hold, it's what you choose to protect when that power is threatened." Jasmine read the words quietly, then looked up at Christopher. "That's what you told me in the clinic," she said with a smile. "No," he replied gently. "That's what you reminded me." Together they stood in that moment, not as survivor and savior, not as CEO and staff, but as two people who had seen the worst in humanity and had chosen instead to build something better. The storm had passed, the empire had evolved, and from the heart of darkness a legacy of light had begun to shine across the world. If this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe to Deep Inside HQ, where we uncover the truths hidden behind power, betrayal, and resilience. Every week we bring you powerful narratives that reveal how integrity can rise from injustice and how ordinary people make extraordinary choices. Hit the notification bell to never miss a story that could change the way you see the world. If you believe in stories that inspire transformation, that hold power accountable, and that celebrate courage in silence, this is your place. Join our community today and be part of the journey toward deeper understanding and lasting impact.